am doing great.
Wonderful. Oh, I'm so glad to see. Oh, good. We're both wearing kind of a green blue. I love it.
Yeah, we are. It's too bad it's not March.
I know that this is true.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
you are in Ohio, correct?
I am just outside of the city of Cleveland. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have relatives who live in Granville,
Okay.
which is right outside Columbus. And
Right.
then I have a really funny story about Ohio because we used to live in Kentucky. And so Fabled is in Bookshop, and my husband and Fabled is in Texas. And my husband and I lived in Kentucky. And one time we were trying to drive to Cincinnati and we just made a wrong turn. And when you're in Texas, to get out of the state, you have to try very hard. You have to drive many hours.
Yeah, of course. It's
and
enormous.
We made a wrong turn and it said, "Welcome to Illinois." And I was like, how did that happen?
Oh my God. Instead of just going straight.
Yes, I think we just,
it's not so much your sense of direction. It's just the sense of scale.
Yes.
You probably just drove because.
So we laughed really hard at that. And to
that's
pick a wrong turn.
That's a great story. I have a friend in Akron and I tease her about this she was trying to come up to Cleveland. She ended up in Pittsburgh. She was, I think her husband was driving and he's a really great driver, but she was in charge of the directions. So she read the map wrong or something and they went in the opposite direction. So
that is a really long way to go.
Yeah, it is. And they came to the dinner party like 2.5 hours late or something.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
So, yeah.
Well, we usually have, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'm not like presenting anything, right?
You are not. This is very casual, very fun.
Perfect.
I have questions. I hope that's okay.
That's totally fine.
Okay, great. Well, we usually have our book buyer, Elizabeth Barnhill, with us, and she is not with us tonight. She had another thing she had to get to. So she usually is with us, and she is so sad to miss because she absolutely adored this book.
Oh, thank you. She tell her I said hello. Anyway.
I will definitely.
Okay. Right.
Well, great. And so we have, as far as like our format, we have several people who join from all over the US, which we're so flattered that they do that. And so everyone has read the book. And so we just ask you questions about everything. And so for anyone who's listening, if this is your first time to be with us, you're welcome to write a question in the chat. Since it's only me, I will hopefully see it. Sometimes our chat goes really fast because everyone is so enthusiastic and I love it so much. But hopefully I will see it. If you really want to make sure I do see it, write your question in the Q&A box and I will make sure to ask Thrity so we can get to everybody. So yeah, and if it's okay, I'd love to introduce you with your bio first, and then we'll just have a couple of questions.
That sounds perfect. That sounds perfect.
Wonderful.
Are people already in-house, so to speak?
It looks like, yep, we've got a good amount. We had, I think about 120 people sign up, but this is recorded. So a lot of people will interact the next day too, which is easy. Sometimes when it's a busy weeknight and you got kids or whatever. And I am Allison Frenzel. I didn't get to formally introduce myself. I'm one of the owners at Fabled, and we started this virtual book club, of course, because of COVID times. Right. And it's just taken off, and we have the best community who, and I love how I was just asking everyone where they're from, and there's so many different states represented, which is just wonderful. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much. Right, I'm going to introduce Thrity. Thrity Umrigar is a best-selling author of 8 novels, including The Space Between Us, which was a finalist for the PEN Beyond Margins Award, as well as a memoir and 3 picture books. Her books have been translated into several languages and published in more than 15 countries. She is the winner of a Lambda Literary Award and a Seth Rosenberg Award, and it is a distinguished professor of English at Case Western Reserve University. A recipient of the Nieman Fellowship to Harvard, she has contributed to Washington Post, the New York Times, and Huffington Post. Thrity, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Allison, for hosting me. I really appreciate this. It's an honor to be.
Thank you. It's an honor for us, especially. Your bio is so impressive. All of the things that you list are so amazing. And I love how you're just in so many writing communities. And I just can't wait to actually ask you about so much of that. But as far as this book, Honor, which I will say, it has been a long time since I have read a book that has deeply affected so much emotionally, so much of my perspective. I mean, really so well done. And I really, really loved it. But I would love to hear how you came up with the story.
Yeah, sure. That's an interesting story, I think, in its own right. So several years ago, I couldn't tell you exactly which year this was, I came across a series of stories in the New York Times that were written by the same journalist. Her name is Ellen Berry. She was the correspondent. I think she was the South Asian correspondent at that time for the Times. And a lot of them was situated in small town or rural India. And to be honest with you, even though I grew up in India and lived there till I was 21, I lived in a big city. I grew up in Bombay. So it's not like a lot of what she said in the story. She talked about sort of corruption in the police ranks. She talked about the mistreatment of women. I can't say that it was a complete and utter shock, but I guess it's a measure of how good her reporting was that it really made me sort of stand up and sit up and pay attention. And I was very moved. I was horrified by some of the things I read about, but I was also struck by just the heroism, there's no other way to describe it, of the women who pushed back against patriarchal norms, against traditions that really made no sense anymore, that kind of stuff. And I read those and I was, like I said, I was affected by that, but I certainly didn't think, aha, this is the topic for my next novel. I was working on a different project at that time and I just read them and put them aside. But I found myself going back to that and thinking about it. I just couldn't let go of that. So I think maybe a couple of years went by and then I thought, should I attempt? Because one of the things that struck me immediately, and in the meantime, I was just occasionally reading other stories about honor killings, about religious strife, and all of that somehow seemed connected to a larger piece. And a lot of it had to do with domination and sort of controlling women's bodies, in one way or the other, by deciding who they should marry, when they should marry, if they should marry, if they should work outside the home. It was all sort of structured in a way that it was easy to connect these dots. So that was sort of one notion of what in a traditional society might get, in my opinion, misconstrued as honor, saving face, what will the neighbors say? What will the larger community say if we allow women to do this or that? That was one, again, in my opinion, a twisted notion of honor. But there were so many other examples, including in my own family. I remembered from decades before I ever encountered Ellen Berry's work, my father telling the story of a time when there were riots, communal or religious riots in the city where he still lived. I was already in the States. And he had just very casually mentioned something that he did to help a neighbor. And it was, to him, it was no big deal. But when he told me that story, I just thought, my God, what an amazing thing to do. And that to me was an example of honor in its truest meaning, when you keep your word, when you carry yourself in a dignified and honorable way. So somewhere, in those 2 years of having read these stories, all this sort of got, I was playing with all these different notions of what this beautiful but greatly misunderstood word means. And then one day I just decided to tell this parallel story between these two women, Meena, who lives in the villages, is very poor, is illiterate. It really doesn't have great agency or control over her own life. And yet somewhere deep within her finds the courage to defy the authority of her brothers. And then Smita, the Indian American journalist who comes to India very reluctantly, I might add, for somebody who has not read the book, and decides to tell Meena's story. And honestly, I can't claim that the two women ever become friends, but they certainly become each other's teachers. And Meena especially has some lessons to teach Smita. So that's in a nutshell, in a very long nutshell, how the book came about.
That's so great. Well, I know that you have been a journalist, correct? And to write a fiction story, as far as your writing process, what is it like, I guess, shifting your mind to write a fiction book?
You know, I just realized the other day, and this shocks me because my sort of identity of myself, my self-conception to a large extent still is of a reporter. But I have now officially been a novelist longer than I was a reporter, which it just blows my mind when I say that out loud, you know. But, you know, I was a journalist for a long time. I was a journalist for almost 17 years before I made the switch. And I loved every minute of it. And yet towards the end, I got to a point where I just wanted to tell my own stories because, you know, when you're a journalist, you are only as good as your sources. You know, whatever somebody says, you find a way of reporting that information and conveying it to your readership. But you don't get to bring your own thoughts, your own beliefs into the mix. I mean, you shouldn't really.
Right.
And it was very liberating. So I felt like I got the best of both worlds. And what I mean by that is, you know, being a daily reporter for that amount of time was great practice. You know, it was great practice. Like I always find it funny when my writer friends, you know, who don't have that same background will complain about, oh, I just wasn't in the mood today to write, or, you know, the stars, the planets were not aligned just right, you know. And I just think, if you did that in a newsroom with a bunch of editors, you know, looking over your shoulder and breathing down your neck, I mean, you'd be out, you know, you'd be out of a job like on day 2. Can't do that, right? So the kind of discipline and the work ethic that being a daily reporter gave me, I think really helps me even today. But at the same time, fiction, of course, you know, the ability to not just report the facts, but to tell the truth, you know, the truth as you understand it to be. There is a kind of freedom in that that's simply liberating. It's glorious. I mean, I remember when I wrote my very first novel called Bombay Time, I remember sort of looking over my shoulder and wondering if I really could do all this. You know, am I allowed to just like make up stuff? And the answer was yes, absolutely. You know, so it's been great.
I love that. Well, when you talked about you being the source, it has to be intimidating, especially when your book has been so successful, to create a story that is so wrapped in another country and another culture. Have you received critiques about the book, which I'm assuming because it's in such a, you know, a high platform now, about the culture or how you wrote India or anything else like that?
Sure. And that happens. I think that just comes with the territory. Anytime you tell a difficult truth, anytime you tell an unpleasant truth, there's going to be, you know, a segment of the population or your readership that's going to bristle at that. I think because I'm writing about a poor country, a third world country, and my audience is mostly American readers or Western readers, there is a kind of perhaps understandable defensiveness. You know, there's this desire to say, why do you only have to talk about what's bad about a country like India? Why can't you tell happy stories? Why can't you tell, you know, good stories? There's so much positive stuff that's going on. And I think that's legit, you know, and I think another concern that I have encountered has been, look, it's a country of over 1 billion people, right?
Right.
You're telling a singular story about these handful of characters, but will American readers be able to distinguish between those two? Or will they take characters like Meena and what's happened to her, Smita and what's happened to her, as being stand-ins for or representative of 1 billion people, right? And my answer to that is simple. I have learned in both my careers, first as a journalist and now as a novelist, to simply trust the intelligence of my readers.
I say
You
the
know,
same thing.
and my readers have never let me down. There have been occasional, I mean, so occasional that I can remember them, you know, rare instances of people saying things that have made me wince and say, "Ooh, but no, I'm telling you one story. Please do not, and I'm also telling you a story that's fiction. So please use your judgment to realize, don't extrapolate from what story I'm telling you to the extent where you think I'm talking about a whole very, very diverse nation, right? But for the most part, not only do people not make that assumption, they do something that I have to say is sort of what every writer dreams of, which is people read about a specific situation and specific characters in India, and then they extrapolate and make connections. They make cross-cultural connections and say, okay, so maybe in America, we don't have to grapple with this particular issue, but aha, I can see how we do grapple with this issue, and those are the moments that you live for, right? When you can bring seemingly diverse cultures together and have people see commonality.
Right. I love that. I often am saying that the reader is smarter than a lot of people assume.
Reader is very often smarter than the writer. I'll tell
right.
you. People, no, I'm not even, I'm being a little facetious, but not exactly. People have seen themes and connections in my novels that I have missed at times, And one of my other core beliefs is that the minute a book is released and published and out in the world, it no longer belongs to the writer. It becomes not just the property, but it becomes the creation of the reader at that point, because then it's your imagination, it's your life experience that you're bringing to bear in your reading of the book,
We have a question from someone, and I think you may have answered a little bit of this. Her name is Kim, and she said, I was so convicted about my own beliefs and what I cling to as, quote, truth and traditions. Was it your intention to have the reader sit back and think deeply about their own beliefs when you wrote this book?
Yes. I mean, the short answer to that is yes. I mean, I have no control over how a reader is going to receive my book, but as I said a minute earlier, that is, I think, for most writers, a dream, because you never want, I mean, look, I'm a great example of that, right? I grew up as a teenager in India, reading almost exclusively American writers. I grew up on Steinbeck and Hemingway and Faulkner and Fitzgerald and, you name it, right? I never read those books thinking, oh, I'm reading a book by an American writer about America. At age 14, 15, 16, I consumed those books. I inhaled those books because they told me something about my own life. Right. That's when I discovered, what a book actually is. A book is magic, right? It's an act of magic that you tear down a tree, at least in the old days, right? You put some characters on a white page, and suddenly somebody 10,000 miles away, a kid in Bombay, India, can read the writing of a 65-year-old man named John Steinbeck, writing about California, place she has never been to. And something about what he says tells her the truth about her own life. That's magic. I don't know too many things that make that kind of magic possible, So yes, I mean, so just like I was a consumer of books about a different culture that illuminated my life to me, that is always the hope, I think. And it's one of the reasons we read. We don't only read to know something about somebody else's life. We read to know something about our own lives, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. You are saying all the things that I definitely have thought about, or at least my heart has believed, for sure. Talk about, I thought I was curious when I was reading about the choice of having Meena be first person and everyone else being third person. I would love to hear that choice.
Yeah. So I knew that fairly early on that Meena would talk to us directly to the reader and in the first person. And I think there was a kind of political reason behind it as much as there was a literary reason behind it. And what I mean by that is the book is about Meena not having a voice. The book is about a patriarchal, rural culture imposing its voice on her and her sister to the point where they cannot make fundamental choices about whether to accept a job outside the home, whether to fall in love with a man who happens to be from a different religion, whether to marry that man. Meena in this novel is struggling to find her voice, and that voice is often taken away from her. I felt like if I wrote her story in the third person, I would be compounding that mistake. Like I felt that I had to, as the writer, give Meena her own voice. And frankly, I was interested in knowing what Meena would say if she had the permission to speak. And Meena's voice surprised me because at first I thought she would just be this, she would sound what she was, which was this functionally illiterate woman of very, very modest means who has not stepped foot in a school. She's the daughter of peasants. That's what I expected her to sound like. And Meena surprised me because even in her own innocence or perhaps even ignorance, there is a kind of musical quality, I think, in the way Meena speaks to us. There's a kind of poetry in the way she speaks to us that I thought I needed to convey, in the book.
I love that. That's so good. That's really, really great. I don't mean, okay, I'm not assuming you have an answer for this question, but I don't know the answer. And maybe other people have opinions, which I would love for you to put that in the chat. I was so curious why Smita's father did not change his name when they moved and settled in America.
So are we doing spoilers in this book group?
We are spoilers, yes. So if you have not read it, you can watch the recording later, or you can, yes, that's right. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So why does he not go back?
Yes. No, why does he not change his name back to, that would be my question.
Yeah. Well, I think the book kind of answers that. One is, it's a quirky notion of honor, right? That even though he has made that promise under duress, it's still a promise. Just when he seeks Sushil's help on the eve of his departure, that man puts that condition down and says, I'll help you, sell your apartment, but in return, you have to promise me that you won't do this. And Smita's father is just one of those people who a promise made is a promise kept kind of a thing. So I think that guides him. And we can spend time, agreeing or disagreeing with him. I mean, if somebody's holding a gun to your head and making you promise something, do you have any obligation to keep that promise? So that's the kind of abstract part or the ideological part of why he does that. But there's also a very pragmatic reason. I mean, he's starting life in a new country. He has, had to obviously get a new passport made, and his visa has his new name on it and all those things. So, you're in a new country, you're starting a new job, your kids are going to a new school, your wife is blaming you for bringing her here and she's miserable. There's a lot that's going on, right? So going through the rigmarole of, again, going back to an old name is probably difficult. It's probably easier to just stick with this new identity that has been forced upon him. And he's a scholar of Hinduism, So clearly it's more convenient for him as a scholar to publish under a Hindu name than it would be. He's been scarred, right? He doesn't want any more problems of that nature in the future. So I think for all those reasons, it's easier to just do what has been forced upon you than to once again try and defy the odds.
Makes sense, definitely. There is a question also that Brenda has asked about honor killings, and I thought in a similar way that she says, I've heard of honor killings among Muslims, but not among Hindus. Are both religious groups known to do this? And she says, it's an incredibly well-written and beautiful story. Meena teaches us a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, I know that the term honor killing, usually when we see it in the media, is seen, in the Middle Eastern countries, that kind of stuff. I don't know what the technical definition of the term is. I just take it to mean that anytime a group of people or even a family or individuals feel like they have to avenge something that has brought them dishonor, and the mode of vengeance that they use is to literally try and get rid of the problem by killing one or both parties. To me, that's an honor killing. And I have definitely come across stories, newspaper stories. I mean, that would be a very easy Google search of where, Hindus, it can be anybody. I mean, I'm not singling out any one community at all. It just so happens that in this case, there's just so much horror at the thought of Meena marrying a Muslim man that the brothers decide to hurt that family, So whether it meets a technical definition of honor killing, although I certainly don't think it is unique to, or even the term itself is unique to just Muslim killing. I think it can go either way. Yeah.
That's so true. It was really interesting and overwhelming when reading this, to see how many human rights issues are a problem. I mean, there are like religious versus women versus wealth. I've kind of reading it makes you just feel like there's so much work to be done. Did you ever feel that when you're writing it? As far as, I mean, it's very prevalent that women and religion is big. But I mean, I guess I'm also saying that there's wealth, because I think about how there was a pecking order too, having to do in India with wealth, even if you were the same religion. I guess what I'm asking is, in your research and as a journalist, I would think this too, did you feel a responsibility to do a lot of research about all of those? Did you, I don't know, discipline yourself to say, no, this is my story I'm going to write? I mean, what's the process on that?
It's a great question. I think the answer to your question is more literary than anything else. There is such a thing as pacing a novel. There is such a thing as not completely and utterly overwhelming the reader with just sad stuff, right? I mean, people come to a novel for different reasons, but you want some uplift. You want, it can't be just a complete and utter downer, And you're right. I mean, this novel, because it's a complicated country, because it's a country in transition in many ways, it does deal with some heavy duty issues. All I can tell you is the only thing that I really tried to do consciously, to the best of my ability, was I was not trying to write a sensational novel. Right. I was not trying to write a novel that would just pluck things, the most provocative things from a newspaper headline and dump that into my novel. I felt like these themes and concerns emerged organically. This is something, perhaps more than anything else as a writer, to have a kind of emotional honesty, but also to have a kind of integrity, right, where you're not taking cheap shots at your characters or at a culture that you're trying to describe. And you're not trying to trick or fool your reader in any way. And I do think that when you only do inflammatory or sensational writing, that is a kind of fraud. That is a kind of fooling the reader. That is never, ever my intention. I mean, I have written other novels where I've dealt with extremely difficult issues. But whatever I write about has to be organic. And what I mean by that is it has to come out of the characters of the characters. It has to be sort of an extension of the personality of the characters. This novel just happens, I see all these, I mean, there are intersections between class and religion and the oppression of women. And, you try and find that nexus where these forces come together. And that's the story I tried to tell.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And everyone is affected in the book by those things too. If that was just really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Michelle has a question, and I don't know if I know this. Has the book been printed and sold in India?
I think it's available in India, but we just signed a UK deal, and I think it'll be widely distributed in India when it comes out there.
Okay,
so that'll be just in a few months. Yeah,
that's going to be so fun to hear the thoughts on them. Michelle asked, how has the book been received in India? And I guess we could say anyone that you sent it to that didn't live in the US. And she said, your novel has been incredibly impactful as far as understanding oppression in general and empathy in particular.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah. So if you send it to anyone who lives in India, or what your Indian friends have any opinions about it?
I know people are just, it's available on Amazon there,
Right.
but I have not directly heard back from anybody in India yet. It's just been out for a month. So
that's true. I can't believe it's only been a month.
It's been a month. It's just been, what's today? The 8th. Yeah, it came out January 4th. So it's just been a little over a month. Yeah. Yeah. That's
so great. Did you ever have a alternative ending for the book?
I did wrestle throughout the writing of it with how the book should end in terms of, Smita. I'm so used to talking around.
Yes, you spoil it all.
There's no reason to do that here. That's such a relief. I did wonder if she should walk away or not go back to Mohan, or what the ending should be. But honestly, by the time I had done a full draft of the novel, it felt not so much like a no-brainer, but it just felt like the momentum of the book was headed in that direction. Mm-hmm. And I think I can explain why it felt that way to me. Smita, when we first encounter her on the very first pages of the novel, is basically a damaged character in my way of seeing it. I mean, she has suffered childhood trauma, the incident that has driven her family out of India. And because of that, I think it has really affected her. I mean, it certainly affected her relationship with India. We know that she comes there very reluctantly. She has no real desire to be in India. But more than that, I think she's somebody who won't allow herself to love freely because she's afraid of getting hurt over and over again. And I think as part of Smita's character arc and her growth as a character, I think she has to learn to trust. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, it's not just Mohan that she goes back to. It's the responsibility of a child, right? So Smita is this professional single woman, very, very good at her job. And I think a bit of a disaster in her personal life, and I wanted to make her more whole. And Mohan and Abru seemed like a vehicle to have Smita really be well-rounded by the time the novel ends. Yes, and I think I've still left it with enough doubt that, yeah, she's going back, but she might be back there for 3 months and realize she's made a mistake. She might be there for 17 years and be happy there. We don't know. I don't think, it's not like we are guaranteed a happy ending, but at least for now, I think we are.
I know, I loved that. I thought there was so much, first of all, learning the trauma that she experienced. I admired her bravery for coming back and even, confronting her accuser. And then to see her kind of this redemption involved with her in India was so great too. And like you're saying, like, it doesn't mean that it's happily ever after everything, but there definitely was some redemption. I think we all wanted for Meena and for her child. And so I just thought it was so great. And I think that you saw, even though, you know, she's always talking about the bad things about India, I feel like she really started to love it too and understand it at the end, which was,
I think so. I think that's the difference. You know, I think the scarring that she goes through in her childhood gives her a very truncated, you know, she sees this as India,
right.
and it's actually all of that. And that moment when she has that, yeah, for every Sushil, for every, you know, Govind, Meena's brother, you know, for all these awful things that are done in the name of religion and protecting the honor and reputation of women, you know, just all of that. For all of that, the same country also produces somebody like Mohan, who is about as decent and good as they come. It has produced her father, who is a very honorable man himself, you know. So I think she grows up is what happens, you know. I mean, I think she is stuck in time, you know. She's 12 when the incident happens.
Right.
She's 14 when they leave. And some part of her is really, she's stuck back there. She doesn't, she can't let go of that. And then this entire experience helps her too, I think.
I almost envision, I would love to know what her conversation was with her father when she calls him to tell her, tell him, one, where she's been, two, I have a child, like, I'm taking care of a child now. I mean, poor guy, he's probably like, wait, what?
He's gonna be shocked. Although, you know, I just have a hunch that he does not harbor the same sense of grievance towards India that Smita has carried all these years. I just have a feeling that her father is more mature and just more accepting of what has happened to them, and that he'll be surprised and he might be a little dismayed that she's basically lied to him about her whereabouts. But once he has had time, I can totally see a family trip back, you know, to meet this mystery guy, Mohan. You know, I can see her father being brave enough to do something like that, you know.
That's so good. And I was also thinking in his mind too, he sees the success of his daughter, and his mind, he might even think like, what happened has not affected her. Look at her success. Look at who she is.
Right.
And felt that way too. But yeah, that is so interesting.
I think the kids are more traumatized in some ways, and the mother, of course, was initially too. But I have a feeling that I can't remember his name. Isn't that terrible? The father, but that's terrible.
That's okay.
but I think he, Asif, that's his name. Yeah, I think he has made his peace with it.
That's so great. Melissa has a question about the cover art, which I came to think that they were mangoes. Is that correct?
Right.
Yes. Okay, good. Did you have a strong feeling about the cover art? Did you say it must have mangoes on it, or were there several iterations?
No, this was the only cover that they showed me. Wow. I liked it. I wasn't at first totally convinced of why it was mangoes. I mean, you know, and then the more I thought about it, you know, the mangoes are just a very, very small part of the novel, but they're a very pivotal part. It really is the beginning of the courtship between Meena and Abdul. You know, he has this, he's a poor man himself. He doesn't have much, you know, it's not like, let's go to a fancy swanky restaurant, you know, outside of our village. He gives her this very humble gift of just 2 mangoes, you know, and that's sort of the start of their romance. So I thought Algonquin, my publisher, did, you know, in the art department, did a great job of sort of teasing that out and making that so prominent. You know? It
was, even my husband was at first like, what is that on the cover? And I was like, I don't know yet. And so it took me a while to like, they're mangoes.
Mangoes. Yeah.
That's so great.
And I love how the vine of the fruit like goes around the word honor itself.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very thoughtfully done. Yeah, it's a very striking jacket. And I can take absolutely no credit for it, of course.
You know that someone who I assuming that the artist read the book, which they should, but I feel like they really enjoyed it to be this specific.
Well, or they're
really
just brilliant and, they knew what they were doing. So,
yes, that's
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
I might see if there's any more questions that I wanted to touch on before I ask this big question. What do you envision for this book's impact on Western civilization?
Western civilization.
Yes.
Good grief. Is that your question?
That's my question.
Oh my God. Oh, I mean, I have no idea. I'm just so thankful. The book got a bit of a boost because it was a Reese Book Club pick, and I'm profoundly, look, I'm no spring chicken, right? This is my 9th novel. So I have truly ridden the highs and I have ridden the wave down also. So and that's a good place to be because, it's just, I like to sort of stay here.
Mhm.
But I'm profoundly grateful that the Reese Book Club, did make this their January selection because it has clearly increased the audience and the readership for the book. I'm hoping this is already February. There's a new kid in town. They've already picked somebody else, which is, I think, sounds like a fantastic book also. I just hope it does well, and I hope it gives an individual reader whatever it is that they're seeking when they read the book. I can't think in terms of, a big, large readership, much less Western civilization. But again, like I said earlier, my writing is all about building bridges and making connections. And if that can happen, if it illuminates some aspect of their own lives for a reader, whether they're in, China or America or India or Germany or anywhere else, if those kinds of connections happen between people and a book, that's success.
That's so true. I can't imagine what either that email or phone call must have been like when you hear that Reese Witherspoon has picked your book. I mean, you've said like, I have written other books. I mean, were you like, okay, this is interesting, like we'll see how this goes? Or was it like, oh my word?
I'll tell you, it was very interesting. So it was on my birthday in September.
Oh, wow.
The book was not out till January. So I had to sit on this for almost, 4 months. But what was interesting was my editor called that morning and said, can you hop on a Zoom call? And I, of course, feared the worst. And I thought, oh, there's some real bad news. Either she's leaving or something's wrong with the book. I couldn't imagine. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been either on a Friday or a Saturday. I think it was on a Friday, actually. So
bad news always comes on Fridays too, right?
Exactly. Right. So I tried putting her off by saying, can we do this some other time? And she's like, no, I want to talk to you today. So I get on this Zoom call and it's like 4 other people, the publicist and the marketing people, and they're just beaming. And I was like, okay, guys, what's up? And, they give me the news. And I don't remember my own reaction as much as I remember seeing all those smiling faces. And it made me so happy for them because, it's a acknowledgement of their efforts for the book also. So yeah, it was a very joyous day. And of course, before we got off the call, I told them to start thinking ahead of what surprise they were going to have for my birthday the following year.
Yes, because you're expecting it now.
Yeah, of course, I mean, why not? So
that's so fun.
But yeah, it was great.
That is so great.
I got a lovely email from Reese herself in December, just before the book came out, just saying, how happy she was and wanted to touch base. And I just thought that was such a classy thing to do.
That is amazing. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Reese definitely
seems like a really, really great person. Yeah.
Yes, she does for sure. Are you working on another book now? I'm curious. Yes, probably right in the middle of it, right?
Right in the middle of another book. Yeah. And it's a very different book. I like to mix them up. I don't want to tell the same story or the same kind of story twice. So This is almost in the opposite direction. It's a domestic novel. It's a family drama, and it's about it's also mostly set in India, and it has an Indian American character. He's male. He's 37-year-old guy who goes to India to visit his mom, and while he's there, discovers this family secret that really sort of changes his relationship with his mother, with whom he's always had a bit of a conflicted relationship. And it has to make him take a second look at himself and all that he has believed to be true about his life all these years. But it's set in this small community known as Parsis. It's a very small minority in India. It's a religion that I was raised in. It's a very unique culture, very different. They're not Hindu, they're not Muslim. It's very different culture. So I've enjoyed sort of going back to that and writing and hopefully describing a culture that is wonderful, but the numbers of Parsis in India now are so small that most people on the outside know nothing about it. So it's been fun to sort of recreate that dying world, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Are you a reader as well when you're writing, or do you have to just write and not have any other voices?
I read like normally as I would. I know what you're asking. I know that there are writers who say that they will not allow themselves to read when they're writing it. I can't do that.
I can't imagine doing that either.
Yeah, I can't either, frankly.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Thrity. This has been so wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes. I feel like talking to you, and someone mentioned this in the chat, that has made us love the book more. And that is so true. It's so neat hearing your heart and behind it, and just our own perspectives being opened. And I think you've just given us more than a book to read. I feel like you've given us a lot of things to think about. And
thank you. You're lovely. Thank you for saying such nice things. And may I just thank whoever is here in the chat.
Yes.
Thank you for attending. I know it's a weekday, so I doubly appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. And please tell your friends about my book.
We will definitely be pushing this book. And if you don't mind for hanging around for just 10 seconds, because we're going to announce our book for this next month, and I'm going to put in the chat the links to it. This one was picked by Elizabeth, our book buyer, is one of her favorites. It's Love and Saffron by Kim Ray, and she is going to also be with us on March 15th. I've put some links in the chat that you can sign up to be a part of that group. When Elizabeth read this book, she read it in 2021 and said, this is going to be one of my favorites for 2022. So she had already decided. So we're so excited to talk to Kim, and I haven't read the book yet, so I'm really excited to anything that Elizabeth sells me, as I usually love. So I'm excited to read that too. But thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, Thrity, for your time, and we will definitely be selling this book for sure.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And all the very best to you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.